All right, let's jump right in. We're going to talk about something that, works in the background, but it honestly affects almost every single part of our lives. We're talking about administrative law, which is basically the official rulebook that the government itself has to follow.
I want you to really think about this for a second. Imagine a government agency could just make a huge decision about your life, like, say, taking your passport and killing your travel plans, and then just not tell you why. This isn't just some random hypothetical. It's a real question that gets right to the very heart of why administrative law is so incredibly important.
So for our first section, we're going to unpack this fundamental tug of war between the power of the state and your rights as an individual.
I mean, think about it. Issuing licenses, regulating businesses, managing public health, setting environmental standards. Government agencies are making these kinds of calls all day, every day. But who's watching the watchers? Who makes sure all that immense power isn't just used however they want, and that they're actually following their own rules? That's the big puzzle we're going to solve.
And that leads us perfectly into Section 2. If we've got a problem of power that could go unchecked, well, we're going to need a solution. So let's properly introduce the watchdog in this story, administrative law itself.
I love this definition for how simple and powerful it is. Professor H.W.R. Wade just boils it all down to the absolute essentials. He says it's all about one thing, the control of governmental power. Its main job, its whole reason for being, is to keep the government inside its legal lane, to protect you, the citizen, from any potential abuse of that power.
And to build on that, we have this classic definition from Jennings. See, it's not just about controlling power that already exists. It's also about defining that power in the first place. This law actually sets up the blueprint for government agencies, what they can do, what they must do, and just as important, where their power stops.
So if we put it all together, administrative law really has 4 main jobs. First, it's a control mechanism, stopping random, off-the-cuff decisions. Second, it's the structural framework, the literal org chart of power. Third, it gives us procedural safeguards, forcing agencies to follow fair steps. And maybe most crucially, it gives you a remedial system, a way to actually fight back in court if you think your rights have been stepped on.
Okay, so I know these principles can feel a little abstract. So let's make it real. Let's look at a true story that brings all this to life. This next section is all about a landmark legal battle that shows this law in dramatic, powerful action.
Picture this. It's India, 1978. A citizen named Maneka Gandhi is told her passport has been impounded. Just like that. She's ordered to hand it over, which means she can no longer travel outside the country.
So, naturally, she asks why. And the government's response? It was simply, in the public interest. That's it. No other details, no specific reasons, no evidence, no chance for her to argue her side of the story. This is the exact kind of vague, arbitrary action that administrative law is built to fight.
So what does she do? She takes the case all the way to the Supreme Court. And what the court said next was absolutely monumental. They ruled that the phrase procedure established by law doesn't just mean following any old procedure. The procedure itself has to be fair, it has to be just, and it has to be reasonable. It's not enough to just check the boxes. The whole process has to be fundamentally fair.
And this right here shows you just how much the law evolved. It's a total game changer. Look at this comparison. Back in 1950, in a case called A.K. Gopalan, the court had this really narrow view. It said rights were all separate, in their own little boxes, and any procedure was okay as long as a law was passed for it. But the Maneka Gandhi case blew that wide open. The court finally said no. These rights are all connected, and the procedure itself has to pass a test of fairness. This was a huge leap forward for protecting individual liberty.
Okay, so we've seen why we need this law, and we've seen it in action. Now let's get into the how. How does it actually work? This section is all about the specific tools you'll find in the Administrative Law Toolkit. So here's a quick look at the main tools. You have rulemaking, where agencies can create their own regulations. You have adjudication, which happens in these special administrative tribunals. They're kind of like mini courts for specific issues. Then you have the big one, judicial review, which lets regular courts check if an agency's action was even legal. And finally, you have the ombudsman, who's like an independent investigator for when you have a complaint against the government. It's a whole system of checks and balances.
Let's just zoom in on judicial review for a sec, because it's so powerful. The process is actually pretty straightforward. Step 1. An agency makes a decision. Step 2. You, the person affected by it, decide to challenge it. Step 3. A court reviews what happened, not to make the decision for the agency, but just to check if it was legal, reasonable, and fair. And finally, Step 4. The court can say the decision stands, throw it out completely, or send it back to be done the right way.
Now, of course, having a great set of tools on paper doesn't always mean things work perfectly in the real world. So let's get real for a minute in Section 5 and talk about the challenges this whole system faces every day.
Yeah, the system definitely has its struggles. Political pressure can warp decisions that are supposed to be impartial. Bureaucratic red tape can mean that justice delayed really is justice denied. Imagine a small business waiting years for a permit. That's a real problem. And then you get agencies fighting over who's in charge. But maybe the biggest challenge of all is just awareness. A lot of people simply don't know that these rights and these tools even exist for them to use.
So even with all those challenges, let's tie this all together in our final section and really hammer home why this rulebook for power is so absolutely critical for any modern democratic society.
Here's the bottom line. Administrative law is that essential safeguard. It's the mechanism that stands right in the middle, trying to maintain that delicate, vital balance between the government's authority to govern and your fundamental right to be free.
At the end of the day, this is what pushes our government toward good governance. By demanding that power be used within the rules, it forces accountability, it promotes transparency, and it insists on fairness. And those are the very pillars of a society that I think we all want to live in.
And all of this leaves us with one last and really critical question. In a world where government just keeps getting more and more complex and more powerful, how do we, as citizens, make sure that its rulebook, which is our main line of defense, stays strong, stays fair, and actually works for every single one of us? That's the ongoing challenge for all of us to think about.